Welcome guys to another tutoring session, and today we're going to look at the quotient rule when you are finding the derivative of a fraction. So this is the quotient rule that you apply when you are deriving a function. So the quotient rule says if you are given a function and you have a function divided by another function, of course h of x could mean any term. It could be an expression, or it could be a trigonometric function, whichever the case might be. The principle is the same in applying the quotient rule. So how you apply the quotient rule is you take the denominator, multiply by the derivative of the numerator, minus the numerator multiplied by the derivative of the denominator, and then you square the denominator. So let me repeat that. H of x, you see h of x, you take the derivative of it, which is h prime of x, multiplied by the denominator. Now you subtract. Take the numerator h of x multiplied by the derivative. So in other words, you first derive this one, then you come to derive this one, and then you square the denominator. But remember also to multiply. So if you find the derivative of h of x, you must multiply it with g of x. That's what we did here. If you find the derivative of g of x, you must multiply it with h of x, and then divide it by the denominator, squaring the denominator. That's how the quotient rule works. Let's look at an example of finding the derivative of a fraction by application of a quotient rule. Of course, there are other alternative ways of solving this. So quotient rule is not the only way. You can apply the chain rule, and we're going to look at that in the next episode. And so in applying the quotient rule, remember, applying the quotient rule is you find the derivative of the numerator, multiply by the denominator, minus the derivative of the denominator, multiply by the numerator, and then square the denominator. So let's get down to it. So finding the derivative, which is denoted by g prime of x. So we take the numerator, we take the denominator with x minus 2, multiply by the derivative of the numerator, which will be, what is the derivative of the numerator? How do we differentiate? We bring down this 3, we subtract 1, which means it will be 3x squared. Derivative of a constant number is 0, so that falls away. Now we say minus. We derived this one. Now we come to the other one. So we'll have x3 minus 8 multiplied by, now we find the derivative of the denominator. What is the derivative of x is 1. The derivative of a constant number is 0. So it means we'll have 1 minus 0. So the final answer becomes 1. Divide by, you square then the denominator. Okay, now we can simplify out the numerator by multiplying out the brackets. So this 3x squared, it's as good as being here in front of this bracket. So you treat it the same way. So in other words, the 3x will multiply here, which then will give us 3x times x. Because we are multiplying the same basis, we add the exponents, the laws of exponents. The first law of exponent, if we are multiplying the same base, you add the exponents. So it means this will be x times x squared, which will be x to the power 3, minus 3 times 2, which is 6x squared. Then we move to the next one. We have a minus multiplied by the negative by the 1. So it will just remain the same. Now we multiply by the negative, we'll have negative x cubed, negative times negative, which is positive 8, all over x minus 2 all squared, which then becomes, do we have any like terms? Yes, it's this one and that one. We subtract their coefficients. So the number here is 1, here the number is 3. So the coefficient, we subtract the coefficient, it means it will be 3 minus 1, which gives us 2x cubed minus 6x squared plus 8 divided by x minus 2 all squared. That's the answer to the and finding the derivative of two functions that are multiplied together using the multiplication rule of derivatives. So the rule says if you have two functions multiplied to one another, at the end of the day, when it comes to derivatives, at the end of the day, every function must be differentiated. But as you differentiate the other term, multiply it with the other function. So if you are differentiating this term, you must multiply it with this other term. Plus, if you are differentiating the other term, you must multiply it with this other term. The same also with the quotient rule. The difference with the quotient rule and the multiplication rule is that the quotient rule uses a minus, meanwhile the multiplication rule uses a plus. And the difference also with the quotient rule is it squares the denominator. The multiplication rule does not. You must bear in mind on that. So the application of the multiplication rule is you take the first function, so g of x, we multiply by the derivative of h of x. So that's what we did here. G of x multiply the derivative of h of x. Plus, because we're differentiating this one, now we must differentiate the other one, multiply by that term. So that's what we did here. So that's how the multiplication rule works. You take the first term, first function multiplied by the derivative, plus this function multiplied by that derivative. And then you simplify further. That's how it goes. So we're going to look at an example on applying of this rule. Right. Now let's look at an example on applying the multiplication rule given this example. So if you notice here on the example, it is 3 multiplied by the x squared. So in other words, we have two functions. This is your g of x and this is your h of x. So how you apply the multiplication rule, it says take the first term, which is 3, multiply by the derivative of x squared. What is the derivative of x squared? What do you think is the derivative of x squared? 2x. How do we find 2x? We bring the 2 down, we subtract 1. So it means it will be 2x, 2 minus 1, which will be 1. Then we say plus. Now we come to the second function. Remember we're differentiating this one. Now we must differentiate 3. So it means we'll have h of x, which is x squared, multiplied by the derivative of 3, which is g prime of x. The derivative of a constant number. What is the derivative of a constant number? Any number which we are differentiating and it's constant, it's a 0. Which then means that when we simplify it further, this will be 3 times 2. When we expand this or we distribute the 3 into the bracket, it will be 3 times 2, which will be 6x plus x squared times 0. The answer is 0. What do you think is the final answer? Any number added to a 0 is that number. So if it is 6x plus 0, then the final answer is 6x. That's how you apply the multiplication rule. I know there is a quicker way you could have done this by just bringing the 2 down here and then you multiply, you subtract 1. So you bring the 2 down here. If you use the quick one is you bring the 2 here, which will be 3 times 2, you subtract 1, it would have given you 6x. But in case you get a question that expects you to apply the multiplication rule, this is the method in which you use to apply. So I'm going to give you another example which I would like you to do and comment on the section for you to try out as you apply the multiplication rule. So if you are given f of x is equal to 3x square root of x, I want you to apply the multiplication rule on this example. Thank you.